Let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes
It's actually
in
a big
importance of
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours. I am Andrew, joined as always by my amazing co-host, Mr. Jonny Rickard. How are you today, Jonny?
I'm good, man. How are you?
It's a great day. Christian's already in chat here, hanging out with the old team, saying hi. So,
I was looking at the videos for the intro, and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of people that don't work here anymore in these videos.
I know.
It's not a bad. They left on good terms. It's not bad. We love all of our friends.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was realizing the other day that actually, what was it? 4 years ago, I think last week was when we had the first stream. It was like May.
Yeah, it was,
no, it was May 4th.
Me and Chris Short. I grabbed my Star Wars RPG book that's still on the shelf over there, and that was the first stream.
So it wasn't last week. It was the beginning of the month. Yeah, hard to believe it's been 4 years that we've been doing live streaming, and that means I think September, October is when we kicked off Ask an OpenShift Admin. So coming up on 4 years of this one, which is pretty amazing.
It's awesome.
So yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to the stream. So for anybody who hasn't joined us before, if you're listening to us new or anything like that, this is one of the Office Hours series of live streams here on Red Hat Live Streaming, which means that we're here to answer any and all questions that you happen to have about OpenShift. And that is irrespective of today's topic. Wow, that was hard to say.
Tonic?
I know.
Tonic?
No.
Gin and tonic?
Atomic, maybe? Yeah. I was watching Fallout, the Fallout TV series the other night. So
great. Good show.
So feel free to ask any questions that come to mind here in chat if you're watching us live, or you can always reach out to us via email, via chat, via all the different things if you are not watching us live. But today's topic is one that is, I had the very distinct honor and pleasure of introducing or showcasing to the world during Red Hat Summit on the Day 2 keynote. But really, I am just the not so pretty face that was on stage. Erik is the brains and has done just a massive amount of work and is by far the smartest person that I know of when we talk about OpenShift Lightspeed. So we wanted to take time. We wanted to introduce it, like really look at it, really showcase what it can do, and was it Peter Lauterbach loves to say, being Red Hat transparent, and show both the things that are good and maybe the things that we're still, I'm going to say, training the model on.
Well, that's an important topic. Is that we're not training a model, but we can get into some of those things later. But hi everybody. I'm Erik Jacobs. I've been on some of the streams a long time ago. If any of you were watching the multiplayer game development stream that we used to do, that was one of my efforts there for a while. But these days I have been intimately involved with the OpenShift Lightspeed project that we announced at just broke my tape measure that I typically play with as a fidget toy. So we
Fidget cube, yeah.
Anyway, so I've been working very closely with the OpenShift Lightspeed project. Whilst I may be the smartest person that Sully knows on it, I am by far not the smartest person working on the project. We have real engineers that actually know things like how to program code, write code, working on it furiously. So there's a lot of folks behind it. I just happen to be the face today. Gaming for busy people. Yes, I do have a YouTube channel, Strategy for Busy People. Anyway, so I've got a few slides. It's like real short. Some of it's things you probably already know, but then we're just going to get into a live demo and kind of play with OpenShift Lightspeed a little bit. You'll see, as Sully pointed out, some of the things that are good, some of the things that are not so great. And then we're here to just answer questions about it. And as Sully mentioned, any other kind of OpenShift related topics.
Yeah.
Let's see, where's the button?
We do have a couple of top of mind topics, things that I just dropped in there from recent threads and recent conversations that we've had. So, Jonny, do you have the list up?
I do.
Okay.
The first is
quick.
Yeah. So the first one that I see on here is OpenShift virtualization in macOS.
Oh yeah. So I dropped that on there because I've seen, I don't know if it's related to the same thing and just I'm seeing multiple threads on it, but I've had a couple of people ask, like, can we virtualize macOS using OpenShift virtualization? Because it's KVM, right? Underneath the covers. And in theory, you can do that. My response to the person that asked this inside Red Hat was, I'm pretty sure Apple would not be very happy with us if that was a
Well, that was the whole. There was a whole big scandal about. It was in the other direction years ago. Somebody got Mac OS running on not Mac hardware, and Apple went after them. I can't remember what that project was called.
well,
I know
I've
exactly
always
what you're
heard
talking about.
the Hackintosh.
Yeah,
is the-
Hackintosh.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I know. I say I know. Anecdotally, I have heard of people who will, they will virtualize Mac OS on Apple hardware, and that is within their EULA or terms of service or whatever with their software agreement. I want to say GitHub. GitHub has a thing where you can use GitHub runners isn't the right word. Anyways, thank you. GitHub Actions. I was thinking GitLab runners. GitHub Actions that will run on Apple Silicon and stuff like that. But yeah, OpenShift doesn't run on Apple Silicon, and you may be able to hack it in there, no pun intended, where it'll work. But we corporately, of course, cannot support or endorse anything like that. But so maybe it'll work.
Yeah, if you do like
let's see.
Fusion, I think you can I think if you have Fusion on your Mac, you can do like a virtual machine off of that. I'll have to try it because it's been a while. But that's straight up x86. It's not like you fancy kids with your your M4s and M3s.
Mine's just an M1. It's the corporate provided laptop.
Oh, sorry, budget Mac.
Let's see, what's Nate saying here? Many iOS developers like to use virtualized environments for building and testing apps. Yeah.
Shift. I mean, isn't what are they calling it now? Not OpenShift Local. Is it OpenShift Local? Yeah, isn't OpenShift Local basically like hack and shift?
Yep, the replacement for mini shift, not to be confused with micro shift.
Yeah.
Which, yeah. Let's see, what was next on our list? There was go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
Yeah, there was an interesting thread that was talking about how to reduce the amount of time it takes to apply updates. This one is interesting for a couple of reasons. So one, there is a as yet unavailable publicly, but I mean, like everything Red Hat, it's open source. So I think you can see it in the GitHub repo. But it's image-based CoreOS. So the folks that are behind...
Isn't CoreOS already effectively image-based?
Yeah, but the way that I've seen this is it's the entire image. Is sort of like how gosh, why am I blanking? The RHEL image-based RHEL, right? So same principle, but applied to the entirety of CoreOS, and it reduces update time for things like single node OpenShift from dozens of minutes to dozens of seconds. So there's a whole thing on that I don't know when it'll come out, but I saw some of the early performance results from doing updates for thousands of nodes that were just ridiculously impressive.
That's cool.
But that one's not really available today, right? That's way further out on the roadmap and all that other stuff. So what I really wanted to point out, and sort of the conclusion to the thread, was even if your cluster is internet connected, you can use a local mirror. And now you're not dependent on the internet speed and pulling down what's often several gigabytes of data for every cluster that you're going through and updating, and that can pretty significantly reduce update times. The other side is to increase the concurrency with your machine config pools. So by default, OpenShift sets the concurrency to 1, or the max unavailable to 1. So only one machine at a time will be rebooted. If you bump that up and you can set it to a percentage number, then you can achieve those, or you can make those updates happen a lot faster.
Well, as long as you can tolerate that many reboots, right?
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that you're what is it?
Pod disruption budget.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Hopefully we don't break any applications in the process, but let's see. Christian and others chatting here. Just I see things scrolling, but I don't actually.
It's just actively saying hello to everybody. Christian's out there just like, hey, everybody. Hey.
Oh, and some spam from Twitch. That's nice.
Yeah, it happens. Let's see. And last but not least is entitlements for OpenShift on OpenShift virtualization. So this is one, I think we have a long overdue update to the subscription guide. So let's see. Do I have the subscription guide up? I can bring up the subscription guide. So let's share this. So the subscription guide, you can see, hasn't been updated since May of last year. So we've had a number of different issues with getting it updated this time around because of just lots of change, lots of things where we want to be clear and concise and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll have a new updated version of this coming out relatively soon. I signed off on the updates like 4 months ago, so I don't know what's going on. Anyways, so one of the things that's not clear at the moment is how we entitle when I'm deploying OpenShift, virtual OpenShift onto OpenShift virtualization. And there's a couple of different scenarios that apply here depending on precisely what you're doing. So first, the general rule or the rule of thumb to go by is we only want you to pay for the OpenShift that's being used for your applications. So whether it's a virtual worker node, whether it's a physical worker node, the goal is if your applications are being there, those are the entitlements that you need. So if we think of that rule and the way that we apply it for things like OpenShift on OpenShift virtualization, if you're not deploying your applications, be they container-based or virtual machine-based, to the underlying physical OpenShift, it's just hosting virtual OpenShift instances, then that's considered infrastructure, right? It's infrastructure for hosting our OpenShift instances. And then we would need to entitle all of those virtual worker nodes using core-based entitlements. Now, if I am deploying OpenShift or my applications, my workload to the physical nodes in that cluster, then I would want to use bare metal entitlements for those bare metal servers. And then if I also have virtual OpenShift nodes deployed on top of there using hosted control planes or standalone OpenShift, then I want to pay for those core-based virtual nodes. You may be thinking to yourself, oh, well, then I'm double paying, right? I'm paying for both the hardware and I'm paying for the virtual ones, right? So maybe, but you don't have to. And what I mean by that is you can take that physical cluster and you can use taints and labels and basically pin those virtual OpenShift nodes to certain nodes in the cluster that are considered infrastructure. And then your VMs, your containers, would go on to the other nodes in that cluster that have entitlements, socket-based or bare metal entitlements associated with them. So I see a lot of questions come up about this. It feels like there's at least 2 or 3 a week that come up in Slack or in email or in various other ways. So I wanted to get it out there, and now maybe we can just link to this little blurb in the live stream to help people understand. But any questions about that, feel free to reach out. Happy to keep those, happy to answer those questions because it is important. And like I said, our goal is not to have you, like, we only want you to have to entitle the things that are actually running your applications, not, all the other stuff. Anything going on in chat here, Jonny? OpenShift on OpenShift.
Cisco ACI.
Yeah, that's going to say we have the one question.
Yeah. Are you aware I have customers using the Cisco ACI plugin? Yes, there are some that are using it. I've been hearing more about it with OpenShift virtualization coming about more recently. That being said, and Cisco also is a great partner in that they are pretty consistently the first ones to update their certification for new versions of OpenShift. So definitely folks out there using it. Cisco also just acquired Isovalent. So Cilium is also in their portfolio now. I don't know how that'll work with them and whether or not they'll, prefer or favor one over the other, but definitely getting use out there. Jonny, Eric, do you ever see it come up?
I'm nowhere near the core OpenShift stuff these days with all the Lightspeed work. So
yeah, I'm nowhere near it because I don't really mess. I don't have customers anymore.
And
Not
you're
like
an
they used to.
Yeah, you're in
Yeah.
you're in engineering now. Let's see. Waiting for persistent storage blog for OpenShift and OpenShift. Yeah, we should talk to some folks about that. So for hosted control planes, I believe now that you can hosted control planes with OpenShift virtualization. I believe that you can use ODF at the hosting cluster level, so the bare metal cluster level. You can use CSI for that in the hosted clusters. But the hosted clusters can use whatever CSI they want. If you've got an external Dell, NetApp, Fujitsu, Hitachi, whatever storage array, you can absolutely use that from within those clusters. I didn't see anything about OpenShift and OpenShift in the CCSP subscription guide. I don't know anything about that. We don't talk about the CCSP stuff in the subscription guide, like the one I was just sharing. We'd have to look at the SKUs and the price list and all that. And to be honest, I don't know how to interpret any of that stuff. Occasionally, some people will ask me like, "Oh, what does this mean?" I don't know. I work for the BU, Let's see how to pronounce isovalent. I don't know how you pronounce it in California, Christian, but I think that's all we got. Was there anything else, Johnny?
Nope. That's it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk some OpenShift Lightspeed then.
Where's my slides here? Okay.
Okay.
Let me know when you've got it fired up.
Yeah, we can see your slides.
Okay, great. So for folks who are at Summit or who watch the keynotes remotely or what have you, some of this is going to be review. Super quick. I'm not going to bore you to death with a bajillion slides. But unless you've kind of been living under a rock, you realize that there's been a lot of change in sort of the virtual assistant space as it relates to large language models and AI more broadly, right? And so ChatGPT has really changed the game, and when it came onto the scene, it was really sort of earth-shattering. Since then, there's been a tremendous amount of developments, both in the proprietary and the open model space. But everybody's still kind of operating around this core, like it's a lot like Clippy, but not as terrible. And so what we announced at Summit was OpenShift Lightspeed, which is essentially a large language model powered virtual assistant that runs on OpenShift. So the key things for OpenShift Lightspeed as compared to some of the other solutions that are out there today, it's integrated directly into the OpenShift web console. Nobody else right now is doing that. There are some other sort of K8 AI related tools, but a lot of them are either command line driven or sort of run in their own place. It potentially helps troubleshoot, investigate, and learn more about what's going on in your cluster. And of course, uses various large language model providers that are out there. And we're combining it internally with the OpenShift documentation using retrieval augmented generation. And so it's easily installed via an operator, which definitely makes it super easy. It's quite literally 2 YAML objects that are relatively simple to get it up and running. And one of them is a secret. We're using, as I said, the OpenShift documentation for retrieval augmented generation and spending a lot of time spinning around on that, trying to make it better in terms of what it pulls out of the documentation in relation to your question and what parts it sends along and so on and so forth. As Sully mentioned earlier, and I alluded to sort of contrarily, is that a word? Contrarily?
We'll make it a word.
Yeah, we'll make it a word for today. We are not training or serving a model right now. Today, we are operating under a bring your own LLM provider model. I'm sorry to use that word, but we're currently supporting, and again, it's not a product yet, so there's not really support, but go with it. You can use, better terminology, Azure OpenAI, OpenAI directly, or WatsonX.ai. And so the environment, go ahead.
That's the same as Ansible Lightspeed, right? They don't
Sort of.
serve a model either.
So Ansible worked closely with IBM Research to develop a code-specific, an Ansible-specific code completion model. That part of the system, the actual code completion model, is running on WatsonX and requires, I might be butchering this, so don't take it verbatim, but it's for the best of my memory. You have to have a subscription with Watson Code Assistant and then the subscription for Ansible Lightspeed, which gives you access to the special model that runs on Watson Code Assistant. So it's kind of a two-piece puzzle. The Ansible Lightspeed infrastructure runs outside of your IDE environment and outside of your literal four walls, right? It's a software as a service essentially. OpenShift Lightspeed, at least initially, is on premises. It is not software as a service other than the model provider. So that's a good opportunity to skip to the architecture diagram, which is super trivial. So as you'll see when we use it today, the user interacts with the web console interface, which is just sort of a natural language interface pop out on the right-hand side of the OpenShift console. That makes API calls to the Lightspeed service, which is also running inside the same cluster. And then we do some pre-processing and then send that question and potentially some documentation off to whatever the configured LLM provider is. Today, we're going to be using Azure OpenAI for the demonstration. And then in the background, we're collecting all of the conversation transcripts. And there's also a feedback feature, kind of traditional thumbs up, thumbs down, tell us what you liked or didn't like. We take all of that, we bundle it up, and then using the existing insights and telemetry systems at Red Hat, we securely send that off. And it's anonymized in terms of the user. So we don't know that John or Susan or Pat or Jeff was the one who had the conversation. We can tie it to the organization. So like we know that this happened at Acme Corp, but that's the extent of the sort of identification that we can do. Why are we doing the conversation transcript and feedback collection? Just like everybody does, right? Like we want to make the system better. Two things. One, the more conversations we see, the better idea we have of what people are trying to do with the assistant. And then we can build some optimizations into it to make it better at doing those things. And then, of course, on the feedback front, that gives us an idea of how those things are working, or that like maybe we have some problems in particular areas, like we were just talking about virtualization. If all the feedback about the answers to virtualization questions are bad, that gives us a great corpus of questions to use. And then internally, we can try to figure out how do we make this better? Oh, look, like we're actually missing a huge chunk of the OpenShift virtualization documentation, or like we have to tune some of the settings in the retrieval augmented generation, or who knows what, right? But basically the reason we're trying to do this is because it will help us make things better more directly than any other metrics or telemetry probably can in relation to other systems.
And I'm assuming we're not like we get that transcript and we don't like use that to train the model further. Rather, we use that for, oh, this question was asked, this was the response, the feedback was negative, let's see what we can do in order to improve that, rather than let's feed that into the model type.
Right. And so today we're, as I mentioned earlier, we are not training any models. We are using whatever's available in Watson X or OpenAI or Azure OpenAI right off the shelf. And so I think my environment is using like GPT-3.5 Turbo 16K. That may not mean anything to you. Don't worry, it doesn't have to. But we didn't train it. We did nothing. It's literally just like I provisioned it in Azure and I was done. The only thing we're doing is including bits of documentation. Now, if you're familiar with the guts of LLM systems, there's a thing called system instructions, which you've probably seen in other places in other demos. Like, you are a happy assistant that, you know, has a Scottish accent and likes to talk about, you know, Saturday Night Live, but you also know a lot about OpenShift. Like, please don't answer questions that aren't OpenShift. Okay, here's the question. So you'd be surprised at how much tuning goes into that set of system instructions to improve or change or whatever, you know, the outcome and the answers that you get. Similarly, there's a lot of tuning that goes with retrieval augmented generation, where you send documents basically along with user questions to try and get an answer. There's all kinds of things you can do with like the sizing and how you put it in a, I'm not going to get into the details of vector databases, but like how you put stuff in the vector database in the first place and blah, blah, blah. So like we have all these levers we can pull. And so to answer your question succinctly, Sully, like, yeah, the reason we're collecting these transcripts and feedback is because we want a corpus of things we can test and validate against. We are not using these things to train a model. Now, that being said, once we start getting into things like the new RHEL AI / OpenShift AI announcements in relation to InstructLab and the tools that Red Hat is providing now for post training or fine tuning models on specific sort of question and answer pairs. We may use versions of the questions that were asked and then provide better or good answers and then do that for some kind of Red Hat model, but that nobody's tried it yet, and it's not even necessarily on the roadmap in terms of Red Hat providing a model that has been trained specifically on Red Hat stuff, right? So keep your eyes peeled and sort of your ears to the ground on that one. I don't know that there's going to be announcements, but like it would make sense for us to do such a thing, because we certainly have a lot of also proprietary data that you know, the normal model providers don't have access to, like Azure, OpenAI, watsonx. Like they don't have access to Red Hat's knowledge base. They don't have access to Red Hat's corpus of support tickets and other things. So like, are we doing those things? Could we do those things? Maybe, I don't know. Like it's not my wheelhouse, so to speak. But anyway, that's a very rambly, long answer to your question.
So let me, I'm going to recap, summarize, and maybe add a few things.
Sure.
And I look at you as a subject matter expert for sure, far
Okay.
more than me. So please confirm, deny, or correct.
Sure.
So when we look at this, we have the 3 LLM providers, which is more or less either preference. I feel like watsonx gives me better answers than OpenAI, so I'm going to favor that one. Or I have an existing agreement, or
That's usually the one.
I'm already using Azure, and so therefore I can easily access the OpenAI LLM here. And so these are generic LLMs. They don't know by default necessarily anything about OpenShift out of the box. Instead, we use RAG and point it at the OpenShift documentation and basically rely on it to, for lack of a better term, merge its knowledge or merge these 2 things together in order to figure out an answer. But Red Hat and the OpenShift team have done nothing to customize or tailor or teach, for lack of a better term, a model about OpenShift and help it to be smarter about OpenShift specific things. And while so the way that we would potentially do that, and the way that we would envision that happening maybe in the future, is a couple of different things. So one is today it's generic, externally available models. Potentially, Red Hat could create a model that is augmented, I'll say, or has been trained with OpenShift specific things to provide better answers. And then the third stage of that would be, me using RHEL AI and my mind just went blank, Instruct Labs, in order to teach it additional things that are specific to my organization and my environment, my applications, so that it can then go and just like we showed on stage, it's going out and it's saying, okay, when I ask it about application Y, somebody else, Jonny went in and he used Instruct Lab and taught it about, application Y. So now when I ask it things, it has that context, it has that information available to it.
So the best answer I can give you on that last part is maybe, right? So thinking through it, given that we only have these 3 providers, even if you had done that Instruct Lab training on like whatever Llama with your organization's personal information, we don't currently, I'm stressing the word currently, we don't currently have a way for you to actually use that model with this system, right? So until we support whatever either RHEL AI or OpenShift AI end up shipping from a model provider perspective, that Instruct Lab thing kind of, you won't be able to do that. However, what we are working on in the shorter term is the little RAG box. We know that customers want to bring their own information about their environment. So as opposed to having to train and serve your own model and go through the whole Instruct Lab process about, like application Y, as you alluded to, if you had a wiki that already talked about application Y, we want to make it easy for you to bring that wiki and make it a RAG content source, and then have it, be integrated into the system that way. So that's the shorter path to getting your own organizational information in there. It is on our roadmap, hopefully in the shorter term, because that problem actually lines up well with some other problems we have with RAG, like how do we do multi-version or multi-product, like where somebody's documentation is external, etc. So as soon as we solve like this other problem that we're kind of wrestling with, the bring your own documentation kind of comes along for the ride, but we're just not there yet, right? But we do intend to get there. Now, again, that being said, we know that some customers are not going to be able to use public provider models. Azure OpenAI is less public in the sense that like it's tied to your own Azure account and has its own terms and its own subscriptions and so on and so forth. But still, that may not be an option for some customers. And so self-hosted / on-premises model hosting is also on the roadmap. I just couldn't tell you whether that's like the next thing we add or a little bit further on down the list.
And so one thing I want to ask about, because I noticed as we've been talking about this and conceptually, this isn't a smart assistant, right? It's not like SIRI on my phone. I'm not going to say the name because it'll activate, or any of the others, right? It's where I can ask it to do something, turn on the lights or, lock the front door or something like that. Rather, it's
not yet.
Okay.
Let me move this over here so that.
Because I think that was kind of what I was curious about, which is we've never really talked about it in that context. Rather, I'm not replacing the actions of an administrator. I'm helping that administrator do things faster.
Correct. So that it's a good segue into the demo itself, right? So this is the OpenShift console with the Lightspeed assistant integrated. This is the Lightspeed button, right? And so when we click it, it expands the Lightspeed interface. We can ask it a question. So your question about is it like the assistant in my phone? Can it do things for me? Turn on the lights, tell me about whatever. So at this particular moment, we don't have any cluster introspection capability. So if I ask OpenShift Lightspeed, what are the pods in the namespace OpenShift Lightspeed? What it's likely going to do is give me an OC command or tell me how to find pods. It can't actually. Oh, this is funny. So we just we've changed something, and this is news to me. So I would have expected it to give me a answer like how to find it, but it actually said, oh, I can't access real-time information about namespaces or pods, but I can give you general information. And then it goes on to an answer that I don't actually like, but it's fine. We know that that's an important feature for customers, right? Like especially for the kind of target audiences that we're going for. And so this ties in very closely to what you just said about like replacing people. This is not about replacing people. This is about two different things. One is helping people who don't know as much get off the ground and going with simple things, right? So helping that novice get to productivity faster. Hey, I'm brand new to OpenShift. Like, how do I do X? Where do I find Y? Like, blah, blah, blah. And then on the more expert side, we're trying to help them do the things that they already do that might be painful. Like we know that troubleshooting is a big one. So even things like pasting in errors can be helpful depending on what information is available. And so again, a lot of that goes back to like what's in the RAG and so on and so forth.
Yeah, Hillary always makes a good point about this, right? Like Hillary Lipstick, she's always saying something about like as an SRE, like tell me where to go look. Tell me the error in the log that matters to me, and then tell me where to go look, and maybe give me some pointers on like where to start instead of just giving me this like ambiguous like, okay, here's the last 100 lines of a log, you go figure it out and good luck. It's from the expert side. It sounds like that's what we're hopefully gonna get to, right? Where it says, hey, look, here's what I'm seeing. Here's some approaches you can take to fix, right? Some corrective actions.
So, yeah. So I tried to prompt engineer my own question. And unfortunately, it gave me an answer that's Christian will laugh at this joke. It's not intentionally unhelpful, but it's not particularly helpful. I don't care about the API for finding pods, right? So if I try again, maybe how can I use the command line to find the pods in the namespace OpenShift Lightspeed? Maybe the third time will be the charm. Hey, look at that. Okay, it finally gave me an OC command. So we've got some tuning and adjusting to do, but that's the basics. But you saw like it's pretty good it gave interesting answers every time, but again, like some of them weren't particularly helpful. Another thing we try to do is prevent it from answering like ridiculous, you know, and kind of unrelated to OpenShift stuff. Like, hey, I can answer OpenShift questions, not other questions. There is an interesting hack for this though that I probably shouldn't show you, but I'm going to show you anyway. We don't actually validate the second question. We only validate the first question. So let's see what happens here. Oh, we did fix this. Okay, never mind. I thought that was
No,
gonna
no eating
actually-
rocks references or anything like
yeah,
that?
no eating rocks, no edible glue on pizza. Okay, so now some other features that are in here. So we talked a little bit about troubleshooting. This is the actual pod for the Lightspeed service. And so what I'm going to do is actually go to its replica set and then go to its deployment. And then there's this little plus button over here. When I click the plus button, it allows me to actually attach the object that I'm looking at right now in the interface. So I am on the deployment for Lightspeed App Server. If I click, and it even says currently viewing Lightspeed App Server deployment, if I click the YAML button, what we'll see is this little indication like, hey, this YAML under the covers is actually attached to your query, right? And so if I asked, what nodes will this pod run on? I have no idea what kind of answer I'm going to get because we're basically just sending a YAML and a question. And so we'll see what happens. This is dependent on, okay, this will run on worker nodes in the OpenShift cluster. Just for giggles, let's verify that that's true, right? So close this. Hopefully there's a node selector for like worker or something, or otherwise it just sort of made up an answer. Or maybe there isn't a node selector and that's why it just says workers generically.
Yeah. I think that if there isn't any specification, it'll just.
Yeah,
you
no,
could look
good.
for taints. Anything, yeah.
Yeah, I know there wasn't anything. How many
You can also go
pods
to the
will this
details
depend
tab.
on?
The details tab will have a thing called node selector, and it'll tell you if there's any.
Details.
Scroll down a little. Yeah, node selector, no selector.
Replicas 1, which means it will run one pod. So you can, oops, I didn't turn off workgrave. That one messed things up. So you can interact with objects a little bit. You also may have noticed there's also just the status only one. I have a way to deploy like a crash looping pod, which I'm not going to do right now. And if you just attach the status of the YAML and then you're like, hey, can you tell me what's wrong with this pod? If the status was, you know, crash loop back off, it might give you some suggestions about how to fix or resolve crash loop back off. But what I can't do, as you saw earlier, was ask about like, can you tell me which pods are in the crash loop back off state? You know, again, it doesn't have any ability to actually introspect into the cluster right now. Oh, funny, this time so in this case, it was sufficiently non-ambiguous that it decided it was going to give me an actual OC command with which I think actually is correct. Yeah, that'll do it. We should probably format this as some kind of
Code, yeah.
Yeah.
So-
We're working on stuff like that. But anyway, so that's these are the core basics of OpenShift Lightspeed. The only other thing that I can't show easily is this is actually tied into OpenShift RBAC. So by default, everyone is deny except for anybody with cluster admin privileges. And I'm logged in as the cluster admin, as you can see over here, admin. If I logged in as regular user Jonny or whatever, and I had not granted them access to the correct role, then they would get an error when they try to interact with Lightspeed, like, hey, you're unauthorized. You have to contact your administrator. And that's tied into native QBarback. So it would be, you know, like OC, Atom policy, blah, blah type stuff.
Yeah. And so that, I don't know whether you did that on purpose, but you answered one of the questions that was asked. So
no, I can't see. So good for me.
Yeah. So Jonny, do you want to, I know you're tracking questions.
Yep. So Dwayne asked, who's responsible for the data provenance of the AI use or LLM? And then how do we know if it's reproducible?
So I'll need more context on the reproducible part. As you can see, like some things aren't reproducible because there's a thing in language models called temperature, which sort of encourages them to be more random in their responses or whatever. And we're using kind of a relatively low value, but non-zero. So like you might get a different answer if you ask the same question twice. On the provenance side, like Red Hat's doing nothing. We're just saying, hey, use whatever provider you want. Here's the 3 that are supported. When we get to the point of if Red Hat as a company ever ships a model, we would be sort of providing whatever the provenance is. So today, if you look, we're aligned closely with IBM's open sourcing of their Granite model. And so given that that's open source, you can see a lot of the model provenance there, but we don't currently support the open source Granite, which is like Labradorite, I guess, is the InstructLab tuned open source one. Unless that's available in watsonx, I'm not 100% sure it is, but the regular original Granite is available in watsonx, and IBM provided a lot of indemnification and assurances on their stuff there. But anyway, that's a very rambling answer to your question. I think it was Dwayne. Hopefully that suffices, and if not, please ask a follow-up.
Awesome. And then Sammy asked, is this the same concept as KHGPT?
So similar, but a little different. So one of the things that KHGPT does that we're actually looking at sort of borrowing, if you will, from that project, they have what are essentially analyzers, which can be thought of as like specific plugins. So I'm making one up, but just go with the analogy here. So there could be an analyzer that is literally the crash loop backoff analyzer. And all that thing does is find pods that are in the crash loop backoff state. And then what KHGPT does is allow you to expose the things that the analyzers have found in sort of a command line list, and then ask about them. And the ask about them piece essentially just takes some of the details that the analyzer has exposed and ships those off to something like OpenAI or what have you. So if I was to make a similar, the thing that we did where we analyzed this deployment, that's actually similar to what KHGPT is doing. We didn't use any kind of analyzer internally. You had to go find the thing yourself and do it. Now, when I said we're looking at borrowing things, the analyzers are built in a pluggable way in KHGPT. They're not quote unquote in tree, to use a term that Kubernetes likes to use. So nothing prevents OpenShift Lightspeed from figuring out a way to allow you to run the KHGPT analyzers and then expose what they expose similarly in the interface and then do something with it. It is a thought experiment right now. It is not something that is either on the roadmap specifically or something that anybody has actually done yet. But that's kind of sort of the difference. So anyway, to take that one minor step further, like we're not currently particularly pluggable with OpenShift Lightspeed. It's something that we also know that we need to correct. So other than like choosing the model provider, it actually would be rather difficult to add support for a new model provider. It's not built in sort of a pluggable kind of way. Under the covers, we're using tools that are pluggable, like LangChain and LlamaIndex, et cetera, but they're not exposed in a pluggable way. Similarly with the RAG, like we've built that in a particular way. It's not particularly pluggable right now. So sort of becoming more of a pluggable platform is something that is definitely on the roadmap, but it's more of a like, we have to figure out how we're going to do it before we can write any code to do it. But anyway.
See, and to me, like this conversation reinforces just how, even though we take it for granted, just how complex the job of an administrator or developer is, right? Because, you think, I'll ask the LLM, like you did a moment ago, like what's the best recipe for banana bread? And, it'll look at its index of things and it'll find the 100 banana bread recipes that it has and do something like find the average of them and call it the best, right? Whereas
maybe.
It
depends on the model.
Whatever it's doing right behind the scenes. Whereas, asking it things like, you take the stereotypical, like, how much resources is this application using? And it's having to collect all of these things together in real time based off of who knows, how long ago should I look back and should I include this or not include this? Like, what's my threshold for all of these things? Or like, how much, if how do I predict how much resources my application is going to need tomorrow at 4 p.m., and like all of these super complex questions that we as humans kind of do without even thinking about it. You have to realize all of the information that goes into that, all of the analysis that goes into that, and then having something Lightspeed that is able to mimic that. And it's, I don't know, I've said before, we as humans are not being replaced anytime soon, but hopefully things like this make it easier for us to do our jobs.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's the goal of this tool is productivity enhancement, not people replacement. It's the same thing like when I used to talk to customers about satellite about 1,000,000 years ago when I was a sales engineer. The first thing the sort of the admin guy thinks when he sees it is like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna lose my job if we buy this tool. And it's like, no, like you get to actually do the things that are hard, not SSH around and type yum update. That kind of stuff. So yeah, this is definitely not like a replace people kind of thing. Cool.
We
Yeah.
have one more question.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna try on this name, but it's not gonna go well. It looks like it's Gekken. They're asking if the Lightspeed operator is available in the operator hub. They couldn't find it in 4.14 console. I just looked in 4.15. It's not there either.
Right.
At least
Yeah.
under
So
the name
good
of
question.
Lightspeed.
So we have not released anything sort of to the public yet. So I'm using a private catalog source to provide the operator, but that actually sets up a great segue to what I wanted to talk about, which is the alpha program. So we have a alpha that we are launching, and so basically what we're doing here is we're trying to get a small number of customers, 5, 6, 7-ish, to try out the solution with one of the providers and give us feedback directly, but also, for us to flex the conversation transcript recording and feedback systems and so on and so forth. 4.15 is a requirement because we are using a feature of the OpenShift console that did not land until 4.15. We don't have an ability to backport or run on 4.14. The other requirement is you have to show up with one of those 3 model providers, either Azure, OpenAI, or watsonx. There is an asterisk on that. It's not something we're currently testing at all, but there are a number of model servers that will mimic the OpenAI API, sort of bit for bit, I guess. I don't know what you would say for an API. But anyway, so if you had the capability to host your own model, you could theoretically use one of the model servers that speaks the OpenAI API, and like we wouldn't know. And I've tested it in the sense that like it worked once and didn't explode. But we're really trying to focus on customers that have access to one of the 3 quote unquote supported providers. But that being said, please, if you're interested, go fill out the form. We're trying to onboard folks now. It's going to be a very quick thing. Like we'll give you the bits, you play with it for a week, we sync back up, and then we're done. So it's not a huge lift, but again, you will need 4.15. You will need the ability to talk to one of those model providers, and of course, you have to be okay with us sort of, reading your email, so to speak, and collecting all your conversations. But again, that's to make the thing better, not to train the model.
And we have one last question, and it seems like this is probably like the most serious question that like we really need 100% of your attention on. And it's, can you ask Lightspeed if a hot dog is a sandwich? That's per Christian.
I mean,
It's a taco.
Okay, didn't no.
Actually, wasn't there a thing recently I saw in the news where some judge declared that tacos are sandwiches?
Oh, I don't know. I know it was a thing on the internet for a while.
So it doubled down on I can't give you an answer, but I can assure you that OpenShift is not related to hot dogs and okay, I'll consult kuberole.com.
Yeah. Apparently in Indiana, a judge has declared that tacos are sandwiches.
Well, there was that whole drama with like some legislation that had been passed in California where it looked like there was a carve out for Panera Bread in like some law regard. It might have been minimum wage law or something. It was like places that make bread kind of carve out. It's like, oh, like, well, I don't know, but if anybody remembers what I'm talking about, that was amusing. But anyway, I'm sorry, Christian. It would not confirm that hot dogs are indeed sandwiches. Well, technically, hot dogs are tacos, but.
There was a whole internet debate about that. What is it? The cube
Kuberole.
rule of cubes?
Kuberole.com.
Yep, I remember us having that conversation way back during one of our team meetings here in Raleigh years ago.
Indeed.
Um,
Well, that's all I got. Unless folks got other questions, I'm happy to stick around. But those are the basics. And again, please, I'll show the URL one more time. If I can figure out how to. Oh, right, that's full screen browser. There we go. So please feel free, fill out the form. We will reach out and contact you if it looks like you might be a good fit.
all right. So we'll.
Oh, one other thing that I didn't get covered, but somebody may have thought of and didn't ask. Technically, it works with multi-language sometimes. It just depends on the language and the model provider and some other things. So I speak enough Japanese, but not to like ask an intelligent question in so this is like, how do I find a pod? And it will, let's see what happens. Ah, look at that. And it even answered in Japanese. I'd have to translate it because I can't read that fast, but it did figure out, oh, so you get pod. So there you go. Oh, and this one's formatted like properly. So it also, I think we have some issues and challenges where like, if the model provider doesn't respond with something in a markdown block, like we don't know that it's markdown, and then how do you detect that something should be it? So it's just, there's lots of really difficult problems to solve in this space. The goal here is like, we want it to be helpful often, but we know that it can't be perfect all the time. Does that make sense?
And can we do code generation? Like, can we ask
Oh,
how
yeah.
to create?
So that was actually when we first started on this path. That was the original thing that we wanted it to do. And again, this is heavily dependent on the model provider's capabilities. But can you write me a deployment for the image Red HT Summit 2023? Wait, what year is it? 2024. That has 4 replicas and will only run on nodes with the label hot dog equals taco. Should have said YAML. Look at that. My deployment, my app, Red Hat Summit 2024, node selector, hot dog taco. Please note, this deployment assumes you have already labeled your nodes with the appropriate label, hot dog equals taco. Oh, isn't that sweet?
And do these chain? So could you ask it like, oh, and the label, or and add a toleration for?
Sandwiches are definitely not salads, but
Nice.
did it.
That's awesome.
Wow.
So it can do this. And again, this is, 100% dependent on, in my case, Azure OpenAI's ability to generate good Kubernetes YAML. But actually, this does go back to something you mentioned earlier, Sully. Like, Azure OpenAI, basically the same. watsonx, whatever those models are, like they've been trained on large corpuses of internet data. So it's not that nothing was trained on OpenShift with Azure OpenAI. Like it's seen whatever legally, or I don't know how, whatever OpenAI felt that they could include in their training corpus related to things like OpenShift, it has seen. So, there's a lot of knowledge that's embedded in there already. The goal with the RAG is to essentially like kind of guide it to ensure that it produces the correct answer as opposed to potentially hallucinating something that's close.
So can it, best practices are weird, right? But can you ask it, or could you ask it like, for this YAML object, are there any like recommendations, or I'm trying to think of something like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could. It's just, it's one of those things where like,
it's super subjective.
What? Yeah. Like what is the, because it's like recommendations to make to what? Like to like, or I mean, okay, sure. Maybe I could just be like, does this deployment definition, that's not spelled right, definition, conform to standard Kubernetes best practices? I've never tried this before. I have no idea what's about to happen. Do it live. I mean, I'll get an answer. It appears to conform to standard best practices. It includes necessary metadata, annotations, labels, defines the desired state, specification. So like overall, there's a lot. Like, look, that's a good answer. I mean, it's also good that the actual deployment for the Lightspeed system conforms to best practices as far as this model is concerned. But maybe I could find some in the in the cluster that aren't great. But it seems like if there was something wrong, it might have said like it's missing blah blah. But again, highly dependent on the original model's training. And then in our case, like, does our documentation sufficiently suggest what to do correctly? And did we pull the right chunks of documentation to send along with the question? Like, these are all things that we are actively kind of messing around with and trying to figure out.
Something I think that'd be cool, and Andrew, like we got asked about this before, right? Is like, we've got the deployment configs, right? That's being, the way that's going the way of the dodo bird. So making that conversion from the deployment config to a deployment, like, hey, can you take this deployment config and convert it to a deployment for me? And then that way, maybe it strips out all the OpenShift API components and puts it in the actual kube spec.
Wow. There are no deployment configs in a 414 cluster.
Oh,
415 cluster.
No, it's moved on.
I mean, I'm very surprised that we got it done that fast. But anyway, maybe there's something else that is there any replication controllers? No. Anyway,
I had another question and it escaped my mind, so it must not.
I'm sorry, that's my fault. My bad.
Yeah, how dare you? How dare you?
I'm so mean.
Well, thanks for allowing me to share. I mean, I'll hang out if there's any other questions about general OpenShifty stuff. I just got to figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
I can turn it off for you.
There we go.
Yeah, so just a couple minutes while we close out. So for anybody who has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Whatever platform you're watching on, it gets replicated across all of them. So you don't need to do anything special there. If you're not watching us live, of course, feel free to reach out to Jonny or I very easily via email, Jonny, JONNY @redhat.com, or Sully, SULLY @redhat.com. Probably the easiest and fastest way to get a hold of us. We do our best to try and respond to those as we can, although both of us are inundated with email, as it feels like most of the world is these days. You can also ask questions on the Kubernetes Slack channel, or Slack team, Slack organization. I can never keep these things straight. But in the Kubernetes Slack organization, there is an OpenShift users channel. Yeah. And so if you go to that URL there, slack.kubernetes.io, that will take you to the invite as well as a link over to their Kubernetes channel there. So, or kubernetes.slack.com. So yeah, if you haven't joined this Kubernetes Slack yet, that URL is a great place where you go in and punch in your email and it sends you the invite. That being said, Jonny, do you know what we're talking about next week? I will tell you, I won't be here next week. So Erik and I will be in Red Hat Tower at this time of day, actually doing some InstructLab stuff, if I recall correctly.
Wednesday, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be telling it about hot dogs and sandwiches.
You've got to start like a whole office war over it, right? Like just get people throwing hot dog buns at people and like sandwich bread with bread off. But yeah, like next week we have the OpenTelemetry people coming on. They're going to talk about OpenTelemetry and why it's important. So something that we've been trying to schedule for a while, but you and I, when one of us is missing, like it's just never good.
Yeah, well that'll be a good one. I'm sad I'm missing it, but they're good folks, smart folks. So that one will be one to learn a bunch about where OpenTelemetry fits in and why OpenTelemetry and all the stuff that we can get out of it. So, all right. Well, I don't have anything else. So thank you, Erik. We really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it was fun.
I love seeing OpenShift Lightspeed, and it's one of those things that I'm just like.
I love doing this because I just got surprised by some of the things that it did. So.
Yeah. Well, and the goal being it makes people more efficient. And like you said a moment ago, right? It's so that we can do things that are actually important and interesting and not boring. Like nobody wants to troubleshoot YAML or like go over these things that are just mundane. So, being able to focus on the challenging problems, the things that are interesting and, hopefully keep us from being woken up in the middle of the night due to, something being broken. the old Johnny, you worked on a help desk, and were a junior sysadmin at one point, right? Being buried firefighting the individual issues instead of being able to find and identify the root cause problems and fix those. So with that, I'm going to figure out which one of these buttons I got to click. Johnny, any last words?
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate it, man. I know it was kind of like a quick turnaround for you. So like really do appreciate you coming on and doing this. This was enlightening for me. So I appreciate it.
Cool.
Bye, y'all.